Hello. Thank you for showing up here and to hear me rant about metadata and supply chains and some European laws. I was considering saying something like this. Hello from the place across the sea, Europa. But I fear that maybe you would enjoy those kind of jokes here. So this probably will apply to you even if you left the warm embraces of European bureaucracy, because some of you might be involved in doing business in Europe. And this is actually true for anybody who wishes to do business in Europe. This can be relevant, but I'm also after creating a picture of you that from a supply chain and ecosystem perspective. So let's see, let's get into this. So there are new laws coming. The Cyber Resilience Act is the main one we're talking about today. Oh, yes, and by the way, I'm Salve Nilsen. I'm from Oslo. I've been in the Oslo Perl Mongers for a while, and now I'm working a little bit with the CPAN Security Group, and that's how I managed to convince the organizers here that I'm important and I should give a talk. So the topic is interesting by itself, though. So it's not that my role in it is actually more an incidental thing. The Cyber Resilience Act is kind of the first big law that affects open source communities horizontally, like in many parts of society. And it specifically speaks of open and free software in the law. That's also a new thing. And that should be a signal to all of us that this is important for anybody who cares about these ecosystems and the open source communities out there, and is part of it. So this is actually important stuff that we shouldn't ignore or leave to somebody else to fix. It will affect all of us. Of course, I have to mention that I'm not standing here as a lawyer, because I'm not one. I'm not even an authority on this in any sense, even if I'm involved in the CPAN Security Group. We're just a bunch of volunteers. So I'm going to present myself here as a volunteer. And in my opinion, that's actually a bit of a brag. I'm happy to say that I'm volunteering. I'm spending some of my own hard-earned time, which I only got a little bit of when I was born. That's about it. So I have spent some of my time on this stuff to share it with you so that you guys can perhaps get a faster road into the material in the coming years. So quickly about the act itself, so we can know what we talk about here. It has been approved. It was adopted by the Commission just like a few weeks ago. And when it's published on the formal publishing website for the European Union, it will take effect 20 days or 21 days later, I think. And from that day, it will take 3 years before it is in full effect. And those are the 3 years where everybody has to learn what's going on and figure out how to do this, and all the bits and pieces to implement it has to be put into place. And this will affect all of us. And especially anybody who cares about open source ecosystems. So what's the goal with the Cyber Resilience Act? It's to increase the general cybersecurity situation across all of Europe. And this one focuses specifically around products, like devices, that are being placed on the market in a bunch of different ways. And so we'll go later into what it actually means. Oh no, we don't go here. It applies to all manufacturers that wish to place products with digital elements on the European market. And this could be anything from IoT devices to your phone, to fridges, to toys, switches and routers, anything that has is a device that has software associated with it. So it doesn't have to just be a software on it. If it needs a service, the service also is the law also applies to the service. Um, and it can include non-tangible tangible digital products by themselves. If you're selling software just as it is, it applies. And it's related services. Um, it does not apply to software that is purely run as a service. There are other laws that are applied to it, and to software that is covered by other regulation, like NIS 2 is about critical infrastructure. The AI Act is about that stuff. Health regulation has a lot of those financial services, and it does not apply to software that is open source. Now, there's an asterisk there. That one should have been this big. Because they claim this is true, and I will say that is a truth with major modifications, and we're going to go into these.
What do you mean by service?
Anything that is network exposed that offers you some output that you pay for. If you receive something that's more of a product, not as if I give you a compliment, that is a service. If I give you money, that is a product. Or if I mean that's okay. Money was it. Yeah. Now that is not spoken as a lawyer, so please don't make life decisions on this. Let's see if we can keep this going. I have half an hour left here. So in this space here, there are 6 roles or institutions or players. We'll skip a bunch of them so to make it quicker. But we have to know what the demands are for the manufacturer. And since we're open source developers and depend on open source developers, we'll have to also take a look at what that means. And this is before we go to the meaty part. So I think I'll have to keep a healthy, a healthy progress here. Manufacturer. So that's somebody who develops and manufactures a product with digital elements. These digital elements are marketed and put on the market, like placed on the market, with a specific product name or a trademark or something. And it could be done with monetization, meaning you get paid for it, or through all the ways of funding it. So there's a little bit of gray area there, but it's still with purpose to make sure this applies to as much as possible, which is reasonably possible. And so there's a whole lot of rules and regulations, and you kind of have to dive into the law text itself to figure out where the demarcation lines go. But I'll try to give you a little bit of a rough picture now. And these products that have now software in it will get this mark. This is new with the Cyber Resilience Act. The Cyber Resilience Act will have to makes it so that software can get a CE mark for the first time. And the CE mark, as usual, is a promise from the manufacturer to say that we are following European regulations and we live up to the demands from that. And that is so that if it turns out they don't, they can say, well, you broke your promise, and now you get the fine, or you're liable. So it's kind of you're painting yourself into a corner by claiming this, and you have to claim it in order to be able to sell on the European market, which is actually an awesome way to make people follow the law. If they want money from European customers, you have to do this. There are a bunch of new demands here. This is the first application. You have to put a CE mark. Next one is you have to, as a manufacturer, have a predefined support period. You have to be clear about it. And by default, this is 5 years, but it can change depending on the typical use and life cycle of the product. And if there are any security fixes that are published for the software, these fixes have to be also made available for additional 5 years. So in 10 years in total. So you have to actually, as a manufacturer, plan to keep your devices on the market alive and well functioning for quite a substantial time. So you have to think long term and figure out what's necessary to do in order to live up to those obligations. I have no idea. You have to have a point of contact. So you cannot just hide behind some anonymous thing or say, oh, that's they who are actually doing something. You have to be completely clear on how to reach out to them, for people to reach out to the manufacturer if something happens, if they discover a vulnerability, for example. The product name has to have a unique identifier, so that we can uniquely refer to it when vulnerabilities are found. So we cannot just say, but we just changed our name and suddenly we have no vulnerabilities. That's not an option anymore. We have to be able to document and share or present how something was built. Like, how was it compiled? What dependencies did it have? How is it put together? You don't have to publish this, but you have to be able to produce this information to an auditor that comes and might do a spot check or something like that. And if there are known vulnerabilities, you have to be able to show that you have addressed those vulnerabilities, either by upgrading a component or mitigating the vulnerability in some other way. And to show this, you have to be able to produce this report in a standardized, machine-readable way, some kind of software bill of materials format, at request. So you have to kind of be ready to produce it on short notice. You cannot just give me 2 weeks and we'll have to, or 2 months. No, not going to work. It has to be there, ready, out of the box. The moment somebody knocks on the door and says, I want your SBOM, and here are my market authority documents. So if you don't do it, then a little bit of a slap over the wrist. And it says in the law, in the Cybersecurity Act, you have to be able to do a minimum for top-level dependencies included in this. That's a trap. If somebody thinks, oh, we don't have to go through all our dependencies because there's no vulnerabilities in the deep dependencies ever, no, not going to happen. So if you are a business, a manufacturer that actually understand what's going on, you know that you have to know all your dependencies. And of course, those manufacturers that go from a minimalist compliance perspective, like we only do the absolute minimum that we have to do, they will go into this trap. So that will be funny to see. And here's a funny one. There has to be, when putting something on the market, there has to be no known vulnerabilities. It has to be secure by default and secure by design. Yeah, that's funny, but it's also real. And that's a bunch of really interesting consequences from this, including that they have to do the due diligence, check all the dependencies, and report anything they find to the maintainers upstream. So it kind of smuggles in a kind of a GPL-like clause for everything. Question? The law says known vulnerabilities. Now, if you know there is a vulnerability in one of your dependencies, you have to show that it doesn't apply to you, or you have mitigated it, or something else if you cannot update the software for some reason. Cisco will have to play the same game. It's your, if you're a manufacturer, it's your task to keep your software safe and valuable. No, well, if you're smart, you will try to make an effort to fix it upstream, but you can fix it locally also. Yeah. But the point is that you, hmm? Yeah, but no, you're not stuck. You can hire a developer to solve it with you. That's not, you're never stuck. But if you have no money, then you have a problem. Then that's that, it's up to you. The final responsibility is with the manufacturer. They have the demands on them. The Cybersecurity Act applies to the manufacturers primarily. Almost all of it is about the people who actually earn money on something that they put on the European market. And however they fix their problems is up to them. And they know their products, they know their dependencies, hopefully, and they are in a position to do something about it. But the nice smiley faces here is because this is a good thing for anybody who uses open source components in their products, which means basically everybody. I think I've seen numbers around from 85% up to 99%, depending on who we talk with, use open source. This is fantastic for the open source community because the manufacturers now have to actually interact, learn how to do it if they don't know it already. This is good stuff. But it comes with the cost that the people upstream will have to find ways to handle this massive, okay, maybe the new situation with the people wanting to do something. They have to, manufacturers have to offer timely security updates. So there's a time limit. It doesn't say. It kind of depends because we have stuff like responsible disclosure rules and whatever timely is, you cannot just ignore it anymore. Updates have to actually be shared with your customers. That means also your products have to be updatable. So that's all another nice, interesting game. You have to be part of an early warning system, which basically says if you discover something, you have to tell the market authorities within 24 hours. And with details about the vulnerability by 72 hours, and a final report within a month. So you kind of have to know what's going on in the products you put on the market. That means there's no more winging it. There's no more willy-nilly, let's see if this works and we'll probably live with it. You have to actually find a way to get the necessary control over your product's build process and your dependencies and all the stuff that's necessary, and have the competent people so that you can live up to this demand. And any incidents that if somebody hacks you or compromises your product, you have to report it to a common reporting platform so that this can be disseminated through the expert communities in Europe. So everybody knows that this firewall has been compromised, start preparing to do the necessary bits and pieces so we can resolve this as fast as we can. All right, this was a super fast overview of the manufacturer. There's more to it. I've shared some of the links down there are actually references to the law, so you can find the slides later and read it yourself. So let's keep the distributor and the importer and the market authorities and open source software steward. I can quickly just mention that the first three ones there are there to check if the manufacturer does their job. An importer is not allowed to import something to the European Union without checking, is there a CE mark there? Is the correct documentation in place? Can we figure out what kind of, what this is composed out of? Like, can they produce an S-bomb? stuff like that. So you're not as an importer liable. You have to check that you are actually importing something that is legal to use in the European market. So the market itself polices itself in a sense. And same goes with distributors, and the market authorities are basically appointed by the European Union as somebody who goes around and does whatever, spot checks, or if there's some very important components, like for example, security devices that you use to enter buildings, for example, that has software in them. They know that these are especially important to check if the security posture for that product is proper. Now, open source developers. CRI really doesn't talk about open source developers. No, it's just assumed. We're in the background. Well, it does kind of apply. It has some rules. If you help a project that you're not responsible for, or if you're not monetizing your own product, or if it's not intended for commercial activities, then this law doesn't apply to you. So you don't have to think about it, move on, do what you want. You have a toy project, it can keep on being a toy project. You can have all the fun you want with it, nobody cares. If a business chooses to use your toy project anyway, it's still their responsibility to ensure it's safe to use and it fulfills the requirements, and that they have to do the due diligence.
Should that possible? If I'm the developer of say business paper, then I have.
There is more.
Okay.
Yeah, there is more to it. If you have something that is ultimately intended for a commercial activity, which means this is actually kind of a new metadata field. Now we're starting to touch the main topic here. We'll have to be able somehow to specify if software is intended for commercial use. That is completely new. We don't have this on CPAN. There's no ecosystem that has something similar to that. The people who should know better or do know better, they are still discussing it. I'm going to give you the early Salve's take on it. And of course, I'm right. I'm an authority. I'm a lawyer. Take it with what amount of salt you need. This is like a trigger. It triggers a few things that can happen. And one of them is that if you say it is ultimately intended for commercial activities, we get to make use of a new institution that the Cyber Resilience Act talks about, and that is the open source steward. That is supposed to be a middle organization that helps manufacturers do their due diligence. If they have 10,000 dependencies, if each manufacturer should go through all their dependencies, that will just be a many-to-many relationship that will be completely a mess. So we have a kind of central actor that helps figure out which of the components that still need due diligence and can coordinate these efforts and take some funding, get paid for that, and maybe use some of the surplus money to pay for the open source community efforts out there. So this is some of the good stuff going hidden behind this one. So these were the roles of the developers. There's more to it, of course, but we'll have to dive into the metadata, and I see that we're already halfway here, over halfway, so there's a lot here. So when it comes to metadata and CPAN, there isn't really a CPAN philosophy. It's like, let's keep it optional as much as possible. That's the philosophy of metadata, or the guiding principle that I've found and learned after a bunch of years caring about this topic. But now the laws are coming. Here's the problem. CPAN also isn't a European Union thing, it's a global thing. There will be requirements from the United States, from Japan, from Singapore has some laws coming, and eventually everybody will start getting laws like this implemented. That's the expectation out there. But the European Union is in the front of this. like the EU is a cutting edge in the legislation. That's like incredible in a sense. But that also means whatever happens here will be looked upon and probably emulated later. But we still have to figure out how to look at the different ways of talking about this topic here, and that has already shown us a bunch of problems. Some people, some institutions talk about minimum elements or baseline attributes. Others call it something different. There's a level of requiredness, a minimum or recommended or aspirational, like these metadata fields, what does it look like here at minimum, so as a required, or should we try to be better at something? And what I've been finding out while diving into this last year is that there is no proper common cluster of terms. People use their own vocabulary. So we need kind of a Rosetta Stone out there. I don't know who's going to make that. I try to make something out of that just for me and show it to people and say, oh, this is a lot of work. But yes, it is. And it's mind-numbingly tedious, but it's kind of necessary also. Oh, so take this as a couple, a signal to add a few more grains of salt to what I'm saying. This is not, even if we need a Rosetta Stone, the metadata fields I'm going to show now are not final. So this is just to give you a heads up. So for components that we use, what's the primary component name? Which version is it? What's intended use? How does it have? What is the supplier name? What's the security contact? The copyright notice, that's for the Americans. We don't have copyright in the same sense in Europe. Well, maybe, well, all the Brits, you guys have copyright, I think. So there's author's rights in the French tradition, for example, but it's kind of the same-ish from a different perspective. And you have to list all the licenses and all the things on the right side of hand here are references. And I'll show you the references later, so you can look up yourself. And these are different documents from around, and the stuff that says CRA inside of it is from the Cybersecurity Act. And the TR is a technical recommendation from the German government, and the CISA and NTIs are from two of the big cybersecurity organizations in the United States. And I have not added more. At some point, I cannot just read everything. And just to make it funny, oh, 10 minutes left. Okay, we have to rush through. Just already here, this is the first slide. Version numbering already creates problems because we have different ways of doing versions, like semantic versionings and date versioning, and like we use the decimal version. Deceiver is a good name to Semver and Scalver, and Deceiver is, I think that could be something we can promote on, on behalf of the CPAN. So versions are already a problem. We have to find a way to do unique product identifiers. We don't have that. That works across ecosystems. Cryptographic hashes have to be tracked. Some want a primary component file name. And of course, we need to list all the dependencies. But we also have to, what type of dependencies? The relationships, is it an included dependency? Is it a dynamic dependency? Is it provided or not? It can include like some kind of information around the pedigree and heritage. So this is just a mess. Download locations would be useful. These are not required, but the law is meant to improve the cybersecurity situation, and that means certain information is actually necessary, even if it's not required. So we're having a code commit revision or a link to a repository, maybe that should be required. How about the metadata about the metadata itself? That's actually required. Who's the SBOM author? Is not necessarily the author of the component. When was it made? What format does it use? A serial number? Where do you find it online so you can get a recent version of the same document if there has been updates? Because sometimes an SBOM might be locked to an actual package that is installed but not being upgraded. So it gives you possibly a time slice picture of what the state of the software was at a certain point when you installed it. What tool did you use? And some metadata related to open source steward, like is it intended for commercial use? Who is the steward? A formal security attestation has to be connected to that so that the manufacturer cannot doesn't have to go through due diligence. It just has to show it's already done that, we're fine. And the manufacturers themselves, if you are a manufacturer that publishes on CPAN, you are actually earning money on a framework, for example, then you are doing business. That means you have to actually fulfill the requirements from the Cybersecurity Act. So you have to have conformity assessment body specified, declaration of conformity, specify the support end date, and a link to technical documentation. This is the stuff that you can read if you feel happy for it. It's actually interesting stuff, though, so I recommend it. But there are headaches, and there are inconsistencies in terms. Probably there needs to be more attributes out there. There's a lot of opinions on how to do this. So it's kind of a mess as things are right now. But as things are, it's kind of up to us who care about these topics to actually help improve it. Because some of it cannot be solved downstream. It has to be solved upstream. And that means one of our most cherished attitudes or philosophies in CPAN or in Perl is that we want to ensure that things are backwards and forward compatible forever, easy to understand and upgrade. Maybe we need to allow ourselves to take a step aside from there. If it ain't broke, if you don't fix it, well, the setting now tells us it is broke. So we kind of have to fix it. The law comes here and changes reality. And that means we cannot afford to be a bystander anymore. We cannot just sit and wait for somebody else to fix the problems. We actually have to step up for ourselves to make something happen. So this is what I wanted to show you. If you have questions and comments, we maybe have a few minutes for that. One in the back. Yes, what kind of punishments can manufacturers expect to get if they don't comply? There's a bunch of them. It's kind of in the type, this is a type of response that you've learned from the GDPR. I think it's 2.5% of global turnover or 15 million euros, whatever is the highest of those, is the maximum level. It does not have the type of consequences as the NIS2 directive has, where they literally go after the CEOs and CTOs and say that if you are not compliant, therefore you're not allowed to work as a C-level executive anymore. That's this two directive is about secure infrastructure and critical infrastructure, but it's kind of the same field anymore. So if you're not compliant to NIS2, you're certainly not compliant to Cybersecurity Act. So it depends on what applies to you. But eventually the hammer will be a heavy one. But if we can learn from the GDPR, we can see that they purposefully slowly ramped up the fines to see when it happens or how people react. So they didn't like go in with the full strength at first. And furthermore, we still have 3 years to prepare for this. So it's not like the hammer will hit us quickly. And you kind of have to be really bad in class to get a fine like this. Other questions? Yes? No. No, the fines are about whether or not you are following the law, not harm. It's not per error. It's if you are doing your job. And if your job turns out to be a big one, yes, but if you can show that you are trying as well as you can with the resources you have and you're making responsible decisions, then you might get away with no fine at all. But the point here is to give you a motivation, an incentive to follow it up. And if it turns out you've made several decades of bad decisions that let your code base rot, running on 10-year-old OSs without support, then that's your cost. You'll have to figure out how to get that remedied. Hire some Perl developers.
If you mark a module that releases not intended for commercial use, does that mean that it can't be used?
No. No, it's not like that at all. It's if first of all, I think the sensible thing is to opt in into this. That means if I know nothing, I'm not in. But if I say this is intended for commercial use, then you take some of the responsibility for due diligence on yourself, but you get some support in that and maybe some money through this open source steward, and you make a promise to be available if a vulnerability is discovered so you can quickly respond. And it's a bunch of more things and some formalities and some documentation and policies and stuff that need to be in order. It's not a big task, and the law explicitly says so that open source communities and ecosystems and developers that this law kind of applies to via the steward institution is supposed to have a light touch regime, which means do not make it overly difficult to live up to the recommendations, because they already know pretty well that most software out there is written on a volunteer basis, and if you force somebody to do something on a volunteer basis, this is we kind of stopped doing forced labor and slavery and stuff like that. Like you could say that the military can do some of types of forced labor, but we're not in the military, at least as things are now. So in general, I think you'll be fine if you do nothing. If you have some component that people are using and enjoying, you might actually get some good opportunities to earn some money by saying, okay, I'll make sure that security in my component is up to speed, and all the vulnerabilities are fixed, and we have the organizational stuff in place so we can handle anything that comes. Question? That is a fantastic question, which is way too big for this forum. I'm sorry for this. This is a discussion that will need to be figured out in the coming months and years. And if you care about how organizational and governance topics like this are put together so it's fair and works and creates an ecosystem that is sustainable, then please raise your hand when the drums are being shouted online. And I'm hoping and guessing that the Perl and Raku Foundation might step up and do something around this. I've already made a call for that.
The president of that earlier was offering himself as a point of contact for EU funding.
Yeah, this is more about how the steward role is going to function. And that's a fantastic question, but we cannot cover this. Well, we can talk about it in the next session. Final question. Oh no, two more questions.
If somebody's using a library, for example, it's got a vulnerability, the part they're using doesn't affect them, so therefore it's affected.
Yeah. So that's a way to get out of the problem, but that means you've done the due diligence. You found out that this code path isn't used in our application, so it doesn't apply to us. You write down, you checked what code path it is and show it. And if the auditor comes and checks and sees that and double checks if they are competent, then you're fine. So as with any risk assessment, it's up to you to figure out the cadence and the risk picture. So I would say yes, if you can, if it's sensible. But if your device that you're selling is something that is mounted on a pole somewhere, miles away from the next person who can update the software, or it has no online updating facilities, or I don't know, you have to figure it out. What is possible, what is reasonable, and how much of a damage would it be? Yes, we have a BOF starting in a few minutes. Other than that, this is an ongoing work. We have a CPAN Security Group that is open for everybody who cares. And pick something you are passionate about in this work and come and help us, and let's coordinate. And also make sure that to remember that these next few years has to be the few years where we stop being bystanders. We cannot just wait for everybody else to make something happen. We actually have to step up and do something ourselves. So I hope that can be a motivating point for you guys, and I hope to see you at the BOF afterwards.